Okay, this is chapter 4 of Manku's macro and or microeconomics, and this is going to be called market forces of supply and demand. All right, let's go to our first slide. First slide is all about some markets, and just to make sure that we're all on the same page here, a market is a group of buyers and sellers of a particular good or service. So it can be a physical place, it can be an electronic setting such as eBay, physical place such as an auction house, but a market is an arrangement of buyers and sellers for a particular good or service. The terms supply and demand refer to the behavior of people as they interact with each other in markets. So buyers are governed by demand, or buyers demand things, sellers supply things, and they interact with each other, and there's certain unwritten rules and laws that we will look at that govern their behavior. Economics, especially microeconomics, is about how supply and demand interact in markets. We will be looking at some graphs, and they will be very, very abstract and stylized, and not necessarily looking at the individual behavior of people, but showing how that behavior in supply and demand has an impact upon prices. And that's really the main thing that we're interested in markets is prices. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. Now, markets come in all different shapes and sizes. In economics, especially again microeconomics, we look in particular at 4 basic types of markets. Number 1, competitive markets. These markets are structured such that the products are the same, and there are lots of buyers and lots of sellers, all, shall we say, going after the same product, and the market is so big and the relative role of the buyers and sellers is so small that the players are what's known as price takers. They have to accept the price in the marketplace. They themselves, by their own actions, have very little influence on the market. Second type of market type on the other end of the spectrum is called a monopoly. A monopoly is a single seller of a good or service, and since they're a single seller, they can have some control over the price. They are a price maker. And unlike a competitive market, they have some influence. Now, a single buyer also has some market say. That is called a monopsony. But in this course, we focus, especially in microeconomics, on the monopoly end. Now, there's 2 market structures in between. Market structure number 3 is called monopolistic competition. Here you're selling a differentiated product, something that the individual can control its size or shape, and because it's a differentiated product, there is some degree of price control. Given that the consumer wants my version of the brand of my brand of the product, I can then charge a higher price for that. Finally, there is something known as oligopoly, and an oligopoly is a club or cartel. There is much gamesmanship and strategy. This is generally a few firms that try to act like a monopoly. Okay, so examples of competitive markets would be farming. Everybody's buying the same product. Monopoly, an example would be Microsoft or any utility company, let's say Hawaiian Electric in Hawaii's case. Monopolistic competition, you're selling a differentiated product. Some price control, this could be cereal, coffee, could even be higher education. Oligopoly Examples are OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Companies, tennis balls, some airlines, generally any market structure in which there is a few sellers, maybe between 2 and 5 sellers. Okay, let's go to the next section. And in the next section, we look at the specifics of what we call a demand curve. Now, the demand curve looks at the interaction between the price of the product, in this case, ice cream cones, and the quantity of the product, in this case, ice cream cones as well. This is from the consumer side. So as you can see, at a price of $3, nobody wants to buy ice cream cones. In order to get somebody to buy ice cream cones, you've got to lower the price. So to get 2, price will be $2.50. To get 4, price will be $2. To get 6, price will be $1.50. To get 8, price will be $1. To get 10, price will be 50 cents. And finally, 12 would be at a price of 0. So this is a relationship between, from the consumer perspective, between the price and the quantity of ice cream cones. This is for either an individual or for an entire market. Now let's ask ourselves the following question. Why does the demand curve slope downward? It slopes downward because of something that we call the law of demand. Inverse or negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. In other words, if I want to buy more of the product, you as seller need to lower the price. If I've determined what my price point is going to be, how much I'm willing to buy, at that price, if you want me to buy more, you got to lower the price, especially if we're operating in a competitive market. Now, something else that governs the downward sloping demand curve is what we call in economics the law of diminishing marginal utility. Utility is the extra satisfaction that one receives from consuming a product. Marginal means extra, diminishing means decreasing. So, for example, eating a pizza would be the law of diminishing marginal utility in action. So as I eat more of a pizza, my extra satisfaction goes down as a result of eating that pizza. And as a result, I like it less with each extra bite. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. And the next slide talks about market demand. Market demand is the sum of all individual demands for a good or service. And so we sum up, as the next bullet point shows us, sum up individual demand curves or sum horizontally to obtain the market demand curve. So this looks at the demand curve from the aggregate perspective. Now when economists look at demand, it is always from a market perspective. If you want to see examples of this, look at the Mankiw book and or look at the Aplia. There probably is a problem set in Aplia about market demand. Alright, let's go to the next slide. Very important concept in economics, ceteris paribus. And as you can read here, ceteris paribus is a Latin phrase that means all variables and the ones being studied are assumed to be constant. Ceteris paribus means other things being equal. So, for example, on the demand curve slopes downward because ceteris paribus, lower prices imply a greater quantity demanded. Ceteris paribus in this case means other things that can influence demand are assumed to be held constant or held steady. Like income, like tastes, like preferences, like the prices of other goods. So these items are going to be held constant, and then we'll explore the impact of each of those items upon the buying decisions of the public one at a time. Alright, to keep in mind the ceteris paribus and to keep it all straight, we refer to a slide that I showed you in Chapter 2. 2 simple rules for movements and shifts. Remember Rule 1, when an independent variable changes and that variable does not appear on the graph, the curve on the graph will shift. Rule number 2, when an independent variable does appear on the graph, the curve on the graph will not shift. Instead, there will be a movement. So, remembering back to the demand curve, we had a movement because we had a change in the quantity, or the change in the price that led to a change in the quantity. Both of those variables were on the graph. If the variable is not on the graph, then we will have a shift and not a movement. And as they say down here, let's apply these rules to the following cases of supply and demand. Okay, change in quantity demand versus change in demand. A change in quantity demand is a movement, and it is caused by a change in the price of the product. So now let's look at an example of this. Change in quantity demand, we have the price of cigarettes. On the vertical axis, the number of cigarettes smoked per day on the horizontal, and we will raise the price. And as our price is raised, since that is the independent variable, less people will buy cigarettes as a result. So it's a tax that raises the price of cigarettes, thus less people will be buying the good. Now in microeconomics, we will look a little bit at the shape of the demand curve so that the increase in the price may not lead to that much of a decrease in the quantity demand, but we'll save that for another chapter. Actually, in microeconomics, it'll be in the next chapter, Chapter 5. And this ends part 1 of Chapter 4.